I went to my girlfriend's house to get back the £80,000 I had worked hard to earn, but her whole family threw me out. Her brother snarled, "Come asking for money again and I'll break your legs, then report you for raping my sister." I remember spitting out in anger, "You bastard family! Your wickedness will catch up with you one day." Years later, I realized how immature I had been back then. All talk and no action, that just wasn't right. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. My name is Kelvin Martin, and I'm not a particularly lucky person. I lost both my parents when I was young. My grandmother supported me through university, but fell ill and passed away shortly after I started. On the day of my graduation, I was having a farewell dinner with my roommates. As we left the restaurant, we encountered a man violently slapping a woman. I couldn't stand by and watch this happen. With some liquid courage in me, I decided to intervene along with my good friend Bob Dixon. Bob comes from a wealthy family, but he's very down to earth. He can be a bit dim-witted at times, and when he gets fired up, he doesn't care who he's up against. Bob whispered, "Remember our strategy when we dealt with Joe Carter?" Joe Carter was a classmate at our university who often harassed female students. He got away with it because his stepfather was the headmaster, and his imposing 280-pound frame was enough to intimidate most people. Last time, Bob and I teamed up to teach him a lesson, getting some payback for our fellow students. I nodded in understanding. "You distract him. I'll attack from behind." We exchanged a knowing glance. "Let her go," Bob shouted righteously. The man turned to look at Bob, confused. "I'm not holding you. I meant let go of the girl, you wanker," Bob clarified. At that moment, I quickly grabbed the man's arm and pinned it behind his back, forcing him to the ground. I prefer action over words, it's just my style. "Still want to hit her?" I asked, applying more pressure, causing the man to howl in pain. Bob smugly said, "Now, tell us why you're bullying this girl." "I'm not bullying her. I'm collecting a debt for someone. She's missed several payments. She promised to pay this month, but still hasn't." "Loan shark, eh? Kelvin, let's drag him to the police station," Bob suggested. Just then, the woman who had been hit intervened. "Please don't. I do owe them money, but I've told them I can definitely pay in 3 days. I promise." It was then that I got a good look at the woman. She was strikingly beautiful, with a fair complexion and a delicate, classic charm that made my heart skip a beat. Seeing the red marks on her face from the slaps, I became even angrier and gave the man a hard kick. Bob cursed, "Bloody hell, if you want money, ask for it properly. Why resort to violence?" The man looked confused, so I translated, "He means if you're collecting a debt, do it properly. Why hit someone?" Bob looked a bit embarrassed. "Had a few too many. My words aren't coming out right." In the end, at the woman's request, we let the debt collector go. As he was about to leave, still looking resentful, Bob stopped him. "Hold on a minute." "What now?" the man snapped. "Do you know who we are?" Bob asked. "How the hell would I know who you are?" The man, wary after our ambush and outnumbered, was cautious but clearly irritated. Bob pressed on, "You really don't know?" "No, I don't." "Well, let me tell you. I'm the top dog from the 4th year at South University. Just graduated today, so good luck finding me again. But feel free to try any dirty tricks. I, Joe Carter, have never been afraid of anyone in my life." With that, he led me and the woman away. The woman said softly, "Thank you, Joe." Bob laughed. "Don't mention it. I just used someone else's name in case he tries to get revenge." The woman couldn't help but smile, and I felt my heart flutter as I watched her adorable expression. Later, I learned that this woman's name was Philippa Green. Later still, Philippa became my girlfriend. And that's when my nightmare truly began. Philippa Green came from a rural background and was a recent graduate. According to her, she ended up with a loan because one of her close friends from university halls persuaded her to join a cashback scheme. In a moment of poor judgment, she agreed. As a result, she borrowed £1,000, which was ultimately lost in the scam. Joe Carter noticed my interest in Philippa and directly offered to help with the interest payments. He whispered to me, "Lucky you." Not long after this, Joe went abroad. His father had some business in Japan that required Joe to familiarize himself with quickly. On the day of his departure, Philippa and I went to see him off at the airport. By this time, Joe had realized that Philippa and I were close to becoming a couple. He said a few complimentary words, then patted me on the shoulder. "Brother, in my 4 years at university, you're the only true friend I've made. I'm just popping over there for a bit. Wait for me." With that, Joe turned and left. I felt a bit emotional and muttered to myself, even the best relationships have to face separation someday. It's really quite hard to let go. Philippa, overhearing my words, whispered, "Perhaps some don't have to be apart?" Before I could react, she leaned in and kissed me. After that, we got together. I wasn't really sure why Philippa chose to be with me. According to her, she found me dependable and reliable. My grandmother's old house was demolished, and we received £20,000 in compensation. With this money, I rented a flat for us in the city center and started focusing on my software programming work. Meanwhile, she found a job as a nursery teacher. We were both working hard towards a bright future. I remember clearly that during that time, I felt the sky had never been so blue in my 24 years of life. Everything changed when her brother came to visit us. That day, I had just finished work when I discovered an extra man in the flat, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer shorts. For a moment, I thought I'd been cheated on, but I couldn't believe it. Philippa and I were getting on so well, I couldn't imagine how she could possibly bring another bloke home. "Who are you?" Before I could open my mouth, this scrawny, sleazy-looking yet arrogant half-naked man spoke first. "You come to my place and ask who I am? Oh, you must be Philippa's boyfriend. I'm her brother, Zach Parsons." I frowned. Although I'd heard Philippa mention she had a brother, in her description, he was supposed to be perfect, not only excelling in his studies but also quite handsome. It was impossible to reconcile her description with the seedy little runt in front of me. Moreover, why was he wearing just boxers in his sister's flat? "Where's your sister?" I had to ask. "Oh, I sent her out to get me some fish and chips and beer. Your place is too hot. I don't know how I'll survive the summer here." I couldn't help but ask, "What did you say? You're staying here for the summer. Didn't my sister tell you?" I didn't get into uni, so the family sent me to stay with Philippa and find a job. I felt a bit angry. This person wasn't just unappealing to look at, but he also had very low emotional intelligence, even referring to his sister by her first name, as if all the care she provided was simply expected. Seeing my reluctance, he became irritated. "What? You don't want me to stay here?" I was about to rebuke him when Philippa came through the door, carrying the freshly bought fish and chips. "Oh, Kelvin, you're home early. Zach, this is your brother-in-law. Say hello to him." Zach gave her a contemptuous glance, said nothing, then lit a cigarette and continued playing games on his mobile. For Philippa's sake, I didn't make a scene, but at that moment, I didn't know that I was stepping into a deep whirlpool that would almost consume me. For the next 3 months, Zach Parsons just stayed at my place, eating my food and drinking my drinks. This git didn't even bother looking for a job. He just lounged around playing video games all day, and occasionally bossed his sister around to buy him this and that. I watched all this with a cold eye, because I valued my relationship with Philippa greatly. According to Philippa, Zach would obediently return home after staying here for a few months. I certainly didn't believe that was the case, but on one hand, my feelings for Philippa were deep, and on the other hand, I had been busy collaborating with others to develop an app, so I really didn't have the energy to worry about these things. Moreover, Philippa seemed to have become more diligent. Although Zach constantly created mess in the house, she cleaned up at almost the same speed he made it, so I didn't say anything. During this time, Bob Dixon called me once, wanting to borrow £10,000. I actually kept all my money with Philippa, letting her help save it so we could pool together for a down payment in the future and welcome a new life. However, the company's performance had been quite good this year, and I had received a small bonus of exactly £10,000. So I asked Bob directly, "What's your account number?" Bob was a bit surprised. "You're not even going to ask what I need the money for? Do I need to worry about you cheating me?" Indeed, I had never thought about it that way, because Bob was my best friend like Philippa, one of the most important people in my life. Bob sighed. "Mate, I got into an argument with the regional manager of my dad's company here in Japan, and my dad got angry and stopped my card. So now I'm living on pot noodles every day." It seemed Bob wasn't having an easy time in Japan either. I didn't say much, just directly transferred the £10,000 I had to Bob. About a month later, there was an extra £12,000 in my account. I knew it was from Bob with an additional £2,000 in interest. I wanted to return it, but found that his phone number was no longer in service. I had to let it go. During this period, I had my first entrepreneurial opportunity. A financial project app concept I proposed was well received by many, but now I needed to invest with partners, and I would need to put in about £50,000. I was quite confident about this because I had more than £50,000 saved with Philippa. I could take out a part of it first, and once this app was successful, it would yield more than 100-fold return. The industry was very optimistic about this project, and my investment partners were willing to let me lead the development of this project. I felt the future looked bright, but when I went home to tell Philippa about this, her expression changed. "I lent the money to Zach for his business." "How much did you lend him?" £80,000. When I heard the news, for the first time, I saw Philippa Green's face as truly grotesque, and I felt the world spinning around me. "Why didn't you discuss this with me first?" Despite my usual tendency to suppress my emotions, I couldn't help but lose my temper this time. Philippa, however, burst into tears immediately. He said it was for a legitimate business and promised to pay us back in a month. Plus, my parents called and so faced with Philippa's tears, my emotions softened a bit, but I was still deeply troubled. I pressed on. "Where is he now?" "He moved out at noon today. Said he was going to share an office with someone and live there while working on his startup." I cursed silently. Bloody hell, is that tosser cut out for a startup? He'll run it into the ground. But seeing Philippa's helplessness, my feelings were complicated and painful. I didn't know what to say. People tend to comfort themselves when in dire straits. At that time, I actually hoped he would pay back the money in a month. Looking back now, it was pure self-deception, but people always find false exits for themselves. So I told my business partner that it would take a month for the funds to be available. They said they understood and were willing to wait a month. But just a week later, my hopes were completely shattered when I discovered that the Git had bought a sports car and was taking selfies by the roadside. I saw him with his arm around a girl dressed like a chav, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Enraged, I snatched the cigarette from his mouth and threw it on the ground. "What the bloody hell are you doing with my money?" Zach Parsons' first reaction was panic, but seemingly not wanting to lose face in front of the girl, he said defiantly, "How can you prove it's your money? Philippa gave it to me willingly." Furious, I slapped him across the face. Zach, already small and skinny, a head shorter than me, immediately cowered after being slapped. He shouted, "You dare hit me? I'll tell Philippa. I'll make her dump you." I sneered. "You think it's that easy? Of course. She was born to serve me. Besides, she used to max out her credit cards for me thousands at a time. Why are you making such a fuss now?" Hearing this, I felt as if struck by lightning. I suddenly remembered the scene when I first met Philippa. She was being beaten by loan sharks. She had insisted that she owed money because she believed her roommate and got involved in a refund scam. But later, I thought Philippa was a very down-to-earth, money-saving girl. Otherwise, I wouldn't have entrusted all my money to her. She didn't seem like someone who would fall for a refund scam. Now, combining this with Zach's words, it could only mean one thing from the very beginning. Philippa had been lying to me. Her whole life had been about covering for her good-for-nothing brother. Realizing this, although I hadn't been drinking, my eyes turned red. Zach misinterpreted my expression, thinking I was scared by his breakup threat. and became even more self-righteous. If you don't want to give the money, I'll make her go with someone else. Let me tell you, our family's bride price is at least. Sod off, you wanker. I didn't let him finish. I kicked him to the ground and started punching and kicking him. I wasn't just hitting him, I was venting my emotions, the anger of being deliberately deceived by the person I loved. The chav girl next to Zach, seeing the situation, shouted, "Murder! Murder!" I yelled, "Piss off!" The girl immediately said, "Oh," and ran away. Zach was beaten black and blue. As my anger subsided a bit, I grabbed his neck and demanded, "When are you going to pay back the money? Tell me." "I'll pay tomorrow. I'll pay tomorrow." I knew he couldn't pay it back immediately. I'd have to discuss this with Philippa when I got home. So I let go of his clothes and pointed at his nose. "You won't get away with this money." Saying that, I left him lying by the roadside and staggered home as if I were drunk. When I told Philippa about this incident, she first showed a flash of anger, but that expression vanished instantly. Instead, she asked with concern, "Are you all right?" This subtle change in expression made me feel even more pained. I'd rather believe that I had misread that angry expression, that she wasn't taking her brother's side, but was just flustered and therefore made the wrong expression, because I still wanted to believe that she was just confused, not truly evil. Of course, this belief ultimately led me to suffer greatly. The next day, I went about my usual work routine, but due to a computer malfunction at the office, I finished 2 hours early. As I approached my flat, I suddenly spotted Philippa Green trying to hail a taxi, looking rather flustered. I couldn't help but wonder, is Zach Parsons asking her for money again? I didn't ask her directly. By now, I had grown somewhat wary of Philippa. I thought to myself that if I could just get my money back, even if it was only £40,000, I'd accept it. Then I'd break up with Philippa. I didn't want to keep getting entangled with such a dysfunctional family. So, I discreetly called a cab for myself and followed Philippa's taxi to a warehouse. After getting out of the car, I watched Philippa enter the warehouse. I stood by the iron gate peering inside. I saw 2 rough-looking young men inside, along with Zach Parsons, who had a plaster on his face. "Zach, I won't do what you're asking. Listen to your sister, pay back the rest of the money to your brother-in-law quickly, and sell that car. It's not the kind of vehicle our family should be driving," Philippa said. Zach scoffed. "Philippa, are you turning your back on your own family before you're even married? Don't forget your name. Philippa. Dad gave you that name hoping for a son, and now you're siding with outsiders to bully me." Listening from outside, I felt my anger rising. I used to think her name might be from a classic novel, but now I realized it was a clear sign of her being expected to support her brother at all costs. Faced with Zach's accusation, Philippa seemed at a loss for words, but she still mustered the courage to say, "Anyway, I won't steal the Wedgwood Jasperware for you. It's Kelvin's grandmother's heirloom. Even if it's valuable, we can't sell it." Damn, so this little bastard had his eyes on the Wedgwood Jasperware my grandmother left me. I've always treasured that piece, keeping it in a small box. Bob Dixon had helped me get it appraised before, and it's worth at least £30,000. It seems this Zach Parsons is truly despicable. Not only does he want to bleed me dry for his extravagant lifestyle, but he's even coveting my family heirloom. Looking at Philippa's reaction, my feelings were very mixed. I didn't know whether to say she still had some feelings for me, or that her ingrained habit of supporting her brother at all costs was just too deeply rooted. But before I could think further, Zach said something that shocked me to the core. "Then you can have some fun with Gary and Jason today. I owe them 10 grand in high-interest loans, so you figure it out." At this point, the 2 thugs approached Philippa with lecherous grins on their faces. Philippa looked panicked, backing away. Gary grabbed Philippa and started to tear at her clothes. I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed a metal pipe lying nearby and charged in, starting to fight with the 3 of them. Gary and Jason were considered tough among the local ruffians, so they gave me quite a bit of trouble. But fueled by rage, my fighting spirit was even stronger than usual, and I managed to hold my own against the 3 of them. During the scuffle, I struck Zach's leg with the pipe. He screamed like a stuck pig, cursing Philippa for siding with outsiders to hurt him. Then, I was hit on the back of my head by either Gary or Jason, and I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, I was in the hospital with 2 police officers wanting to take my statement. Apparently, the sounds of the fight had alarmed nearby residents, and someone had called the police. They arrived just minutes after I had passed out. But what I found utterly unbelievable was that Zach Parsons had described the incident as a mutual fight between him and me. I said, "That's not what happened. There were 2 thugs, and Zach Parsons was going to have them rape his sister. If you don't believe me, ask his sister." The response I got was like a bolt from the blue. Zach Parsons' sister said the same thing. Due to the incident where I crippled Zach Parsons with a single blow, I was convicted of grievous bodily harm and sentenced to 3 years in prison. While I was in prison, Philippa Green came to visit me once. She cried and said, "I'm sorry," explaining that her parents came that very day and even knelt before her. She couldn't let her brother go to jail, and with Gary Howard and Jason Lowe having fled, if they sought revenge, Zach might be killed. So she had no choice but to go along with Zach's version of events. From that moment on, Philippa was as good as dead to me. Her apparent vulnerability seemed like a devil's trick to my eyes. Perhaps she wasn't inherently evil, maybe just weak-willed. But the harm she had done to me, the damage she had caused, was unparalleled. Witnessing her performance of remorse, I remained silent and simply stood up to leave. Separated by iron bars, there wasn't much else I could do. In prison, I spent my days either completing labor tasks or reading. Sometimes I would just stare into space. I gazed at the small patch of sky visible through the iron bars, so blue. Yet why was my life so gray? I couldn't understand why, just as I couldn't comprehend why Philippa would protect such a beastly brother, even at the cost of sending me to prison. Due to good behavior, I was released 6 months early. On the day of my release, I suddenly felt like the world had left me behind. I didn't dare contact Bob Dixon, nor the business partner I had once told to wait just 2.5 years. That sibling duo had destroyed everything I had. Fortunately, I still had £1,000 in savings in one of my bank accounts. I rented a small flat, recalling that Philippa had said she'd left my belongings with a distant relative of mine. I retrieved my things but didn't linger to chat, slinking away quietly. However, upon returning home, I discovered my Wedgwood Jasperware was missing. This was truly the last straw, and years of pent-up frustration exploded in an instant. The Parsons siblings had finally taken my most precious possession. With this realization, I began searching through WhatsApp, and through one of Philippa's friends, I learned that her family had moved to the city. After some effort, I found their home and said what I mentioned at the beginning. By this time, it turned out Philippa was pregnant, and her husband looked at least 30 years older than her. Her expression upon seeing me seemed a mix of guilt, avoidance, and perhaps even disgust. I demanded they return my £80,000, but Zach angrily retorted, "Come asking for money again and I'll break your other leg. Then accuse you of raping my sister." He took a couple of limping steps to emphasize his resentment over my crippling him. I considered making threats, but reason prevailed over emotion. I didn't want to end up back in prison. So I simply said, "You lot of bastards, your wickedness will catch up with you. You'll come to a bad end, mark my words." Then, as I heard Zach and his parents cursing behind me, I left without another word. Walking to the roadside, I noticed a newsagent's, its most prominent headline reading, "Founder of finance app Money Matters discusses the bitter taste of entrepreneurship." Seeing this, I couldn't help but burst into tears. It turned out this founder was my former business partner. In other words, he had used my idea to build his own successful venture. And all of this should have been mine. The newsagent, noticing my distress and my prison-style haircut, seemed a bit wary and asked, "You all right, mate?" I shook my head. "I'm fine." I walked step by step back to my rented flat as dark clouds gathered overhead and a downpour began. It's hard for ex-cons to find work, so I could only find labor jobs on construction sites, earning £300 a day. Although I was a developer by trade, I'd always been physically fit, so I gradually settled into life on the building site. It was exhausting, but I managed to scrape by. Moreover, the pay wasn't too bad, even if it fell far short of my previous expectations. 3 years ago, I had imagined I'd be listing on the New York Stock Exchange by now, instead of climbing scaffolding. During the lunch break, I squatted nearby eating my packed lunch. Suddenly, someone called from behind, "Mate, is this yours?" I thought it couldn't possibly be mine. All I had was a hard hat and a vest. Even my cigarettes were bummed off workmates, so I didn't respond and continued eating. But the voice persisted. "Why are you ignoring me? Look." I was getting annoyed and was about to snap back when the person stepped in front of me, hand outstretched, holding something. I glanced at it. It was my grandmother's Wedgwood jasperware. Instantly, my chopsticks clattered to the ground as I looked up at the person standing before me. Bob Dixon, dressed in a black suit. He punched me lightly on the chest and said, "I'm back, brother." I stared blankly at Bob Dixon, unable to speak for a long while. "You." I tried to open my mouth but didn't know what to say. Bob pulled me up and placed the Wedgwood jasperware around my neck, saying, "Brother, come with me to Japan." Then, Bob told me about his experiences over the past few years. After falling out with his father last time, Bob quickly came to his senses. His father then let him take over the business in Japan. He got lucky and acquired a chain of gentlemen's clubs in Tokyo that was on the brink of bankruptcy. Using many popular British marketing strategies, he managed to turn it around successfully. Now he not only had his father's business but also owned 10 gentlemen's clubs located in bustling areas of Tokyo, Osaka, and other cities, becoming a veritable international tycoon. "Come to Japan with me. You can be the technical director of my company." I lowered my head in silence. At this moment, I felt I had no face to stand before Bob anymore. I felt like a complete failure. "You should go. We're not from the same world anymore. It's my own bad luck. I don't want to drag you down." I resisted Bob's kindness, perhaps out of my last bit of self-respect. Seeing my dejected state, Bob came up and slapped me, grabbed my face, and took out his mobile phone, turning the selfie screen towards me. "Look at yourself. What do you look like? You're like a pile of mush. When I used to skip classes and play games in the dorm, you lectured me. Now you're 10 times worse than I was back then." I avoided looking at my cowering self on the screen, but Bob continued to force me to look. "Look, is this the Kelvin Martin I know? Is this the loyal, tough, smart, fierce but not talkative Kelvin? For a woman, you've turned yourself into this. Can you face your grandmother? Can you face the brothers who care about you?" My last psychological defense completely collapsed. I burst into tears, hugging Bob tightly. In all these years, I hadn't cried even when I went to prison, nor when I was working on construction sites to the point of near collapse. This might be the first time I've shed tears since childhood. Bob didn't say anything, but hugged me tightly in return, patting my back forcefully. "How did you get this Wedgwood jasperware?" Bob smiled and told me what had happened. It turned out that once, when some British clients came to play at Bob's gentlemen's club, among them was a woman who looked like a lady of the night, accompanying a wealthy patron. Bob immediately noticed the Wedgwood jasperware the woman was wearing around her neck, which was exactly mine, so he bought it for £10,000. The woman, delighted at making an easy small fortune, happily shared the origin of the Wedgwood jasperware with Bob. It turned out that a small-time crook named Zach Parsons had given it to her while pursuing her. Although I didn't know who Zach Parsons was, as soon as I heard the surname Parsons, I thought of your ex-girlfriend Philippa Green. After that, Bob couldn't reach me by phone or WhatsApp. Finally, a few days ago, unable to contain himself any longer, he specially came back to the UK to find me. After coming back, I found your relatives and only then learned that you had been framed by that bastard Zach Parsons and ended up in prison. Bob's expression turned a bit painful as he said this. "It took me 2 days, pulling strings, to find out that you're now working on a construction site here. I even regretted, If I had asked you to come to Japan with me earlier, would everything have changed? I laughed. It wouldn't have changed, because I wouldn't have known Philippa's true face, and I would never have given up. Men always make fools of themselves in these matters, but I won't anymore. Bob smiled. Good brother. So what do you want to do now? I looked towards the north, saying somewhat indifferently, I'll go to Japan with you. With my abilities, I'll definitely run the technical security aspects of your company perfectly. But before that, I have one thing to do. Bob gave me a meaningful look. You want to have someone do in Zach Parsons? No, some things are more painful than death, I said through gritted teeth. Zach Parsons had been having an extraordinary streak of luck lately. The small pub he owned had recently attracted a big spender. It was a young man who had just returned from studying abroad, and he would come to Zach's pub every day to buy rounds of drinks, leaving generous tips. He looked to be under 30, but seemed rather naive. Apparently, his girlfriend had cheated on him, so he had come back to England to clear his head. Through some smooth talking, Zach quickly won the favor of this rich lad. He even got invited on an all-expenses-paid trip to Tokyo with him. However, in an underground casino in Tokyo, Zach ran into big trouble. A bloke he was playing poker with kept blowing smoke in his face at the start of each hand, making him feel uncomfortable. Luckily, Zach won some money off him. So before heading to the loo, Zach flipped him the bird, which made the lad turn pale with anger. Little did Zach know, he was ambushed by several men as soon as he entered the toilet. After throwing some wild punches, Zach realized he had pushed one of them into the sink next to the toilet. The man hit his temple and stopped breathing immediately. Although Zach was a bit of a troublemaker, he had never killed anyone before. He was stunned. He tried to call the rich lad who had brought him here, but the guy had fled in fear as soon as he saw the large men enter the toilet, leaving Zach to face this deadly situation alone. Then the lad he had been gambling with earlier entered the toilet. It turned out he was the son of a high-ranking official, just visiting Tokyo for fun. He had wanted to teach Zach a lesson for being so cocky, but never expected Zach would kill one of his men. The group first gave Zach a severe beating, then held his head in the toilet bowl, flushing it repeatedly. After several rounds of this, Zach was willing to agree to anything. They made him call his parents to transfer £100,000 immediately. If you don't transfer the money, my mate's death will be for nothing. Of course, this is just the beginning. You can call the police if you want, but we have CCTV footage of you killing someone. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, the official's son said, kicking Zach hard as he waited for the money to arrive from Zach's parents. Zach's family didn't have that kind of money. They had only managed to buy a house in the city because Philippa Green had sold herself for £20,000 in bride price to a local man who had been compensated for relocation. He was an old lecher who had been divorced twice. This money had allowed the family to buy a house and open a small pub for Zach. With no other choice, they had to ask Philippa's lecherous husband for help. He slapped Philippa twice but didn't dare hit her too hard considering she was pregnant. In the end, he only gave them £20,000. Left with no other option, Zach's parents had to sell their house and scrape together £100,000 in a rush, which they transferred to the gang. Since Zach himself was involved in a homicide, the official's son let him return to England after receiving the money. Zach didn't dare report the incident to the police. The family of three had no choice but to move in with Philippa's lecherous brother-in-law, where they endured constant humiliation. All of this was told to me by Philippa Green, as she sat in front of me, crying her heart out. Since last month, I've been maintaining a rather ambiguous relationship with her. I could tell that Philippa still harbored some old feelings for me, at least more than she did for her boorish, lecherous husband. So when I expressed that I no longer held a grudge against her, she seemed to feel somewhat guilty towards me. Being pregnant and stuck at home with few friends, she would come to chat with me whenever she felt troubled. I sympathize with your situation, but I absolutely detest Zach Parsons, as you know. So even though I've recently made a few £100,000, I can't help your family, I said. Philippa nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I just don't have anyone else to confide in, but you understand me, and I'm already so grateful for that. I owe you so much in this life, I waved my hand dismissively. True love doesn't speak of such things. I know you're hurting. They're your parents and your brother. The fact that you've done all this for them proves you have a soft heart. You're a kind girl, Philippa. When Philippa looked at me, she almost resembled the girl I first met. So pitifully vulnerable, so full of emotion. Of course, I suspected it might also have something to do with her learning about my recent windfall from the royalties shared with my former business partners. Add to that her lecherous husband, who not only insisted on bedding her during pregnancy, but also frequently gallivanted about town. And naturally, she saw me in the best possible light. Actually, there's something I've been keeping from you, I said. What is it? My grandmother didn't just leave me a piece of Wedgwood jasperware. She also left me a Royal Doulton figurine. I've had it valued, and it's worth about £100,000. How come I never knew about this? Because I recently sorted through my grandmother's belongings and found a letter she'd left for me. It was hidden in the rafters of our old country house, and I've retrieved it. As she was leaving, I handed Philippa a business card with my address on it. Come and see me sometime. After returning to England, Zach Parsons tried to keep a low profile, but within a few days, he received another demand for money from the politician's son, asking for another £100,000. He initially wanted to ignore it, but for some reason, after leaving his house, he was inexplicably beaten up. That's when he realized that this politician's son was truly omnipresent and could put his life in danger at any moment. With no other choice, he resorted to his old tactics, begging his parents and sister using emotional blackmail. But this time, Philippa Green truly couldn't come up with the money. However, she remembered the Royal Doulton figurine and, after much internal struggle, finally gave Zach the business card. That evening, Zach came to my neighborhood. I had bought a detached house in the suburbs, surrounded by darkness. He watched me return home from work and enter the house. After observing for a while and thinking the lights were off, he boldly attempted to pick the lock. His plan was to unlock the door, enter, take the figurine while I was asleep, and fill his financial hole. A seemingly perfect plan. But what he didn't expect was that when he entered, he found the house brightly lit. The windows had been covered with paper from the outside. About a dozen people were having a party in my house, watching his shifty appearance with a small knife in hand. I fought with him in feigned surprise, kicking him in the groin, and then, seemingly terrified, dragged him away as he collapsed in pain. In the end, the police formally arrested him on charges of armed burglary. Since there was no financial loss, his punishment was relatively light, 10 years in prison. Although I had caused him physical harm, there were too many witnesses at the scene testifying that I had acted in self-defense, so I faced no charges. It's said that during the interrogation, Zach was very careful to conceal the murder incident, stubbornly claiming that he was just trying to steal something out of jealousy of my wealth. As we left the court that day, I saw Philippa looking at me with a complex expression, while her lecherous husband was nowhere to be seen. I smiled at her. Thank you. If it weren't for you, this plan wouldn't have been perfect. Philippa almost shrieked. You planned it all? You set up Zach to steal. There was no Royal Doulton figurine at all, was there? I still have to thank you. Thank you for caring about your brother. You personally sent your brother to prison. Because of your greed. For the first time in 3 years, I laughed with such satisfaction. Philippa, however, seemed to lose her composure, shouting, Why? Why are you doing this to me? Because you've always been a slave to your family, a slave to familial affection. For that, you can betray anyone who loves you. But I don't think that will happen again. I leaned close to Philippa's ear and said, That kick of mine shattered his testicles. I didn't mean to. I accidentally used too much force. So your Parsons family won't be having any children in the future. I guess you'll have to wait for Zach to get out in 10 years and adopt a child. But don't invite me to the christening. I won't have time to come. As I was about to leave, I heard Philippa hysterically shouting, Kelvin Martin, you're just a dam. I turned around, raising an eyebrow. I'm not. But let me tell you one more thing. Last month, I found Gary and Jason, the thugs from back then. They told me personally that the blow that hit me was dealt by you. To save your brother who was about to sell you, you struck me, the person who saved you. Philippa was stunned, not expecting that I would know about this. I stared at her. If it weren't for this incident, perhaps your lecherous husband wouldn't have contracted syphilis, because no one would have introduced him to a prostitute with syphilis so viciously. Counting the days, if you've had any intimate relations, you definitely won't be able to keep that child. With that, I pointed at her belly, smiled, and turned to leave. After this incident, Zach's father suffered a stroke due to extreme anger and became half paralyzed. Zach's mother had to take care of her husband day and night while also working outside, and soon developed liver cancer from exhaustion. As for Philippa, it said she divorced her husband, lost the baby, and has since lived in seclusion, no longer seeing anyone with some mental health issues. That night, I was drinking with Bob, along with one of his employees. Ian, thank you for your performance this time. Your portrayal of the politician's son was spot on. I complimented him. Ian seemed a bit embarrassed. I just imitated those guys who come to our gentlemen's club. Our boss's portrayal of the prodigal son was more convincing. Yes, he was playing himself, I said with a laugh. Bob wasn't pleased. What? You're saying I'm naturally a prodigal son? Let me tell you, my boys charge a lot for performances in Japan, whether playing corpses or gangsters. You have to pay them extra for their roles. Who told you to come up with such a wicked plan to ruin someone's life? I waved the bank card in my hand. Consider it as the employee's wages. Bob didn't hesitate to take it. How much is in here? 100,000 pounds. Bob exclaimed in surprise. Oh? Just that 100,000 pounds that little guy gave you? You're using it all for the performance fee. What are you going to spend on yourself? It's fine, I found a cash cow, quite a fool. I'm going to milk him for life. Who? Ian and I said in unison. You.